Let's be honest. Patricia lifted her wine glass like she was making a toast. She married Derek for the money. The table went silent. Every fork stopped moving. Every eye turned to me. I felt the heat crawl up my neck, but I didn't move. I didn't blink. And Derek, the man I had chosen, the man who had promised to stand beside me, looked straight down at his plate like the pattern on the china had suddenly become very interesting. What none of them knew, not even my husband, was that the house we were all sitting in, it was mine. My name is Jade. I'm 34 years old. And I need you to stay with me until the end of the story because what happened next is something I still think about every single day. I didn't grow up with money. I grew up in a house where the heat got turned down at night to save on the bill, where my mother packed the same lunch every day because it was what we could afford, where every dollar had a purpose, and there was no such thing as a spare one. My father worked construction. My mother cleaned offices on weekday evenings after her day job ended. I watched them both come home exhausted night after night, and I made myself a quiet promise when I was about 14 years old. I promised myself I would build something. I didn't know what yet. I just knew I was going to build it. I was the first person in my family to graduate from college. I paid for that business degree entirely on my own, waitressing 4 nights a week, sometimes 5. I smelled like fryer oil during morning lectures. I wrote papers at 2 in the morning with sore feet and a cup of cold coffee. I was table for 4 years straight. But I graduated, and I didn't stop there. When I met Derek, I was 29 and already 3 years into building my own financial foundation. I wasn't looking for someone to rescue me. I had never been that person. But Derek was warm and funny and genuinely kind, and I fell in love with him honestly and completely. What I didn't fully understand, until it was too late, was that marrying Derek meant marrying his family's opinion of me, and that opinion had already been formed before I ever walked through their door. To Patricia, his mother, I was a liability, a woman from nowhere with nothing impressive to show who had somehow attached herself to her son. She never said it that directly, not at first. She used politeness like a weapon, the kind of polished, smiling politeness that leaves marks you can't point to. Jade's dress is cute, very simple. Jade, you must love that Derek takes care of everything. Small cuts, constant cuts, the kind that don't bleed right away but add up in your chest over time until you feel like you're carrying something heavy every time you walk into that house. I wasn't loud, I wasn't flashy, but I had been quietly building something for years and they had absolutely no idea. If you've ever walked into a room and felt someone decide your entire worth before you opened your mouth, subscribe right now. Drop a comment below and tell me what they got wrong about you. I'm reading every single one. Let's go. For almost 2 years, I sat at that Sunday dinner table and I smiled. I passed the dishes and complimented the cooking and asked polite questions and kept my voice pleasant, even when my jaw was tight. I told myself it would get better. I told myself that people came around eventually, that patience was a form of strength, that Derek would help close the distance over time. I kept telling myself those things until the Sunday that made it impossible to keep pretending. It was a regular evening, pot roast on the table, candles lit, the extended family was there, aunts and uncles and Derek's sister Renee and her husband. Patricia stood at the head of the table with her wine glass raised, and for one moment, I thought she was about to say something warm, something about family or gratitude or the season. Instead, she looked directly at me with a pleasant smile on her face and she said it. Let's just be honest, she married Derek for the money. The room stopped. Every sound disappeared. I felt the words land in my chest like something physical. Renee let out a short laugh. Not a surprised laugh. The kind that says she had been waiting for someone else to say it first. Someone further down the table made a low sound of agreement. Ron, Derek's father, looked at his plate, and Derek, my husband, the man sitting right beside me, cleared his throat once and said absolutely nothing. Patricia set her glass down and folded her hands with the calm of someone who believed they were being reasonable. I just think Derek deserves someone who brings something to the table, not someone who benefits from what we built. I felt something happen inside me in that moment. Not anger, exactly. Anger is hot and loud and it makes you say things. What I felt was colder than that. It was the feeling of a decision being made. Final and quiet and completely certain. I set my fork down. I looked at Patricia directly and I said, "You're right. Let's talk about what's been built." Then I picked up my glass, took one slow sip, and asked someone to pass the rolls. The table didn't know what to do with that. Patricia's smile flickered for just 1 second before she recovered. But I had seen it, and I had already made my decision about what came next. After that evening, things moved quickly. The family began holding what they called investment meetings, closed discussions about the family's rental portfolio and long-term asset planning. I was never invited. Derek started attending without mentioning it to me. I found out one morning when a calendar notification appeared on our shared tablet while I was making breakfast. He hadn't hidden it deliberately. He simply hadn't thought to include me. That was almost worse than if he had hidden it. It meant he had already accepted, somewhere without realizing it, that I didn't belong in those conversations. Then came the brunch. A cousin's birthday celebration at a restaurant with white tablecloths and afternoon light coming through tall windows. Patricia introduced me to a woman she admired, a friend from her social circle. She touched my arm lightly and said, "This is Derek's wife. She's sweet. She doesn't really work in anything serious." The woman smiled politely and tried to ask what I did for work. Patricia talked directly over me and moved the conversation somewhere else. I sat with my hands folded in my lap and I breathed carefully and I said nothing, but I stored it. I was storing everything by then. The third moment came at home, which somehow made it hurt the most. Derek sat across from me one evening with the slightly uncomfortable expression of a man delivering news he knows is not entirely right. He told me his mother thought it made sense to put the family vacation property in his name alone. Protecting family assets, he said. He used that phrase like it was a legal term, like it settled something. He didn't ask what I thought. He didn't seem to notice the silence that followed. He kissed me on the cheek and went to watch television. I sat at the kitchen table alone that night for a long time. The house was quiet around me. The refrigerator hummed. Outside, a car passed slowly on the wet street. I thought about my grandmother. I thought about my mother's tired face after a double shift. I thought about every year I had spent being careful and deliberate and patient. And then I took out my phone and I called Harold. Here's what they never knew. Here is the part that changes everything. When I was 28 years old, my grandmother passed away. She was a woman who had come to this country with almost nothing and spent her entire life cleaning other people's homes. She never spoke about money. She never complained about what she didn't have. But she had been saving with a discipline and a quietness that I had inherited without fully realizing it. When she died, she left me what she had accumulated over decades of careful, invisible work. It wasn't a fortune, but it was real. And it was enough. I used it the way I believed she would have wanted. I found a house. A property in a neighborhood most people weren't paying attention to yet, a street with old oak trees and wide front porches and a particular kind of stillness that felt like potential. I purchased it in my name alone, before I met Derek, before there was any thought of marriage or in-laws or Sunday dinners. I renovated it room by room over 2 years, choosing every detail carefully, and then I began leasing it. 2 years into our relationship, Derek drove past that street by chance. He called me immediately. He said he had just seen the most beautiful house, and he wanted to know if I thought we could ever find something like it. I told him I might know something. I offered him a lease at a rate well below market value because I loved him, and because watching him fall in love with that house made something in me feel warm and certain about our future together. He signed the lease. He told his family he had found a wonderful place. They visited and they loved it, and they made it the center of their Sunday tradition. And not once in all of that time did anyone ask whose name was on the deed. The neighborhood had changed significantly in the years since I bought it. The property value had more than tripled, and the house where Patricia raised her wine glass and called me a gold digger in front of everyone she knew, that house was mine, had always been mine, was still mine. Harold was a semi-retired real estate attorney who had handled my grandmother's estate with great care and professionalism. I trusted him completely. What I learned when I called him that night was something I had not expected. Harold had also done legal work for Derek's family years earlier, before some kind of disagreement had ended the relationship. He knew their patterns. He knew their documents. And when I explained what was happening, he went quiet for a moment and then he said, "Jade, I think it's time you let me pull some things together." Over the following 2 weeks, Harold built a complete legal picture of my holdings, the investment accounts I had opened at 24 and grown carefully over a decade, the property purchase records, the current valuations, the lease agreement in Derek's name, the deed in mine. He also found something else while he was reviewing old documents, discrepancies in boundary declarations on properties the family had transferred between members over the years. The kind of quiet paperwork irregularities that become serious problems when someone decides to look closely. Meanwhile, the family became more confident. Patricia told a relative, and the words reached me the way words always reach the person they're about. "She'll never be part of this family's legacy. She has nothing." She said it with the certainty of someone who had already won. Then Derek came home one evening and sat down with that same uncomfortable expression from before. His family wanted a financial disclosure meeting, a chance to get everything on the table. He said the word routine twice, which told me it was anything but. I looked at him for a long moment. I told him I thought that was an excellent idea. I told him I had a place in mind. I watched something shift slightly in his face, a small uncertainty he couldn't name yet. Harold's office was on the 4th floor of a building downtown. The room smelled like old paper and wood polish, and the particular stillness of a space where serious things had been decided for a very long time. Patricia arrived in a silk blouse. Ron wore a jacket. Renee sat in the chair farthest from me and crossed her arms. Derek sat beside me and didn't reach for my hand. Harold opened by explaining that since full transparency had been requested, he would provide exactly that. Patricia nodded with the satisfaction of someone who expected to watch a performance of inadequacy. Harold placed the first document on the table. He walked through my investment accounts methodically. The opening balances, the growth over 10 years, the current total. Patricia's expression remained controlled, but I could see her recalibrating, adjusting her expectations for what was coming. Harold moved to the property records, the original purchase price, the renovation costs, the rental income history, the current appraised value. Then he reached into the folder and placed one final document on the table and slid it slowly to the center. Patricia looked at it. Something in her face changed in a way I had never seen before. The control slipped. Just for a moment, but I saw it clearly. "What is this?" she said. It wasn't really a question. Harold's voice was completely even. "This is the deed to the residential property you know as your family's Sunday dinner home. This property has been owned solely and exclusively by Jade since the date of purchase, which was approximately 4 years before her marriage to your son. The lease agreement held in Derek's name does not affect ownership. Jade is, and has always been, the sole owner of that property." Ron pushed forward in his chair. "That cannot be right," he said, but the certainty in his voice was already dissolving. Renee said nothing. She was looking at the document like it might change if she stared long enough. Derek sat completely still beside me. I could feel something happening in him, a slow and significant reordering of memories. Every Sunday dinner, every time he had said nothing while his family spoke about me, Every room in that house that his mother had redecorated with opinions and his wife had paid for in full, he was seeing it all again from the beginning. I kept my voice quiet because I didn't need volume. I didn't need drama. I said Derek loved the house the moment he saw it. I gave him a generous lease because I loved him. I never mentioned the ownership because I didn't think what I owned was the measure of whether I deserved respect. I thought being honest and loyal and present was enough. I paused. I was wrong that those things would be enough for this family, but I was not wrong about the house. Patricia opened her mouth. She closed it. She looked at her husband. Ron was looking at the table. Renee had turned slightly toward the window as though she was interested in something outside. I picked up my folder. I thanked Harold by name. I stood up and I walked out of that room. The elevator was quiet on the way down. The lobby smelled like cold air and floor cleaner. I pushed through the glass door and stood on the pavement outside and I breathed. Just breathed. The street was ordinary and moving and completely indifferent to everything that had just happened upstairs. Derek came out a few minutes later. He walked toward me slowly and stopped a few feet away. We stood there on that pavement in the gray afternoon light, and neither of us spoke for a long time. There was too much to say, and none of it was ready yet. What had broken open in that room was going to take time to understand fully. For both of us, Patricia did not host Sunday dinner the following week, or the week after that. The invitations stopped arriving, and after a while I realized I had stopped waiting for them. Derek went through his own private reckoning in the months that followed, with his silence, with the years of watching and saying nothing, with what it meant that he had lived in his wife's house without ever thinking to ask. I gave him space to work through it, because I understood that some things have to be carried alone before they can be shared. What I kept for myself through all of it was something I had not expected to find on the other side of all that patience. It was clarity. A clean and uncluttered understanding of exactly who I was and what I had built and why none of it had ever needed their approval to be real. My grandmother cleaned other people's floors her entire life. She never asked for recognition. She just kept building something true and quiet and lasting in a world that wasn't watching her. I had learned that from her without either of us ever naming it as a lesson. The deed didn't prove I was worthy. That was never what it was for. It proved that I had never been what they said I was. I already knew that. I had known it every single day. I had just been waiting, with far more patience than they deserved, for the moment when they would have no choice but to know it too. If someone has ever looked at where you came from and decided you were nothing, I want you to hear this clearly. You were never in their hands. Not your value, not your story, not your future. Subscribe to this channel and leave your story in the comments below. Tell me exactly what they got wrong about you. Every word. Because you deserve to be heard, and so does the version of you that kept building quietly while no one was watching. Click hype to help this story reach every single person who has ever been underestimated by the people who are supposed to welcome them home. Standing up for yourself is the hardest thing. If you've been there, subscribe and become part of this community. Let me know this story reached you by clicking hype. And tell me where you're watching from, because I genuinely love seeing how far these stories travel.